period finished. We had issues raised in that, very fundamental issues from people with health concerns about autism, children with special needs, and not once in that report anywhere has those issues been dealt with or acknowledged or any effort made to deal with them. And that's in total, that is what is happening in reality on the ground, in total contrast to the spin that we hear from Comeraghs officials. Their consultation is a total failure, but they mean it to be. They mean it to be a total failure. Comeraghs will consult on putting a pylon in your field. Would you have a preferred location for it? I don't want it in my field. Sorry, that's not an option. It's going in your field. Would you have a preferred location as to where you would put it? They don't want to hear about impact, visual impact. They don't want to hear about environmental issues. They don't want to hear about human environmental issues. They don't want to hear about property devaluation. They dismiss it as issues that they do not want to engage on. And that's the facts on the ground. The last point I want to make is about your question about Comeraghs' response to the expert group. This Oireachtas committee, or the previous Oireachtas committee, had Comeraghs in here, and they had the expert commission in here, and they had groups from around the country in here. At that stage it was Ratniskin, Least, the NEPP and ourselves. And there was good engagement, good level of engagement. Exactly 4 days after Comeraghs appeared here, they appeared at a meeting of Monaghan County Council. And under questioning from members of Monaghan County Council, Comeraghs said the independent expert report does not go far enough. Their terms of reference didn't allow them to take an in-depth look at the Irish transmission system. What might have been suitable for Europe was not suitable for Ireland, and that while there was merit in that independent report, it didn't go far enough. It was a job that wasn't completed. We immediately wrote to the previous committee here, and we asked that Comeraghs be questioned on what they had said at Monaghan County Council. And I know that this committee did contact Comeraghs, and I believe they got a response, because we contacted the previous committee here looking for that response, and we were told we couldn't get it. And that's where that point comes from. It doesn't make much sense to us that that response couldn't be in the public domain. But it wasn't something that was made up. It was a statement, it was said, and the newspaper reporter who was at that meeting made front page coverage of it, and we forwarded that newspaper cutting to the previous committee here as well. So that's where that comes from, and as far as we're concerned, that response is treated confidentially. If that's the way it has to be, that's fine. But that was a forum that was held in public, but whatever engagement happened afterwards.
Okay. Deputy Coffey.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And first of all, I want to thank all the groups that have come before the committee today. I believe personally that it is important that you put on the public record your concerns, so that we can obviously take them on board as a committee, but also I think there will be opportunities, hopefully in the near future, that we can actually put some of your concerns specifically to Comeraghs and ask them straight why they haven't been fully transparent in their responses to the various communities around the country. Having said that, and I want to say this at the outset, I do believe, again, as a policy maker, as an elected representative, we need to have a wider debate in this country about the whole area of energy security, the impacts of climate change, and how that will impact the various sectors, whether it is agriculture, transport, or the electricity infrastructure, and also energy demand. I do believe we all have a responsibility to look at that area in depth and to, I suppose, plan out, even though many here will say there's already a plan and we're not happy with it. But if we need to revisit that plan and look at it in a way that it can gain public confidence, well, then that's what we need to do, and I want to say that at the outset. The great dilemma for policymakers is we're charged with the responsibility of providing a national infrastructure, whether it be roads, water or electricity. But on the other hand, if that infrastructure, how it's delivered and how it's developed, if it impacts on our communities, well then we have a serious problem and a serious conflict, and that's what we're hearing here today. Just two areas really I want to focus on, I suppose, are again the engagement and the consultation. I think that's coming up regularly across the board, and how EirGrid are not being transparent in what the information they're providing to the various groups or even indeed individuals. It seems to be a ticking the box exercise. Can I ask just some of the members, like, what is it exactly we need to be asking EirGrid in this respect in regards to consultation? Is it a full cost-benefit analysis, comparing the overhead options versus the underground, taking into account all of the impacts? I presume, you know, some have already stated that, but is that what we need to see specifically? Because I've been critical of EirGrid because they're speaking in generalities, they're talking in the broader, bland terms, but they're not being specific. And what I mean by that is, I'll use the Waterford example. I'm from Waterford. You know, it seems to me they're proposing a number of the least cost, technically acceptable solution to them, which is overhead and the most direct route. When in fact in Waterford, as we all know, there is actually an existing public corridor, which is the N25, which starts at Youghal Bridge and goes all the way to Waterford City. And even from Waterford then northwards to Kildare, we have the M9. So there's an existing corridor. Has anybody seen a cost-benefit analysis of an undergrounding along that corridor? Because I would presume there are less constraints in that respect. There is not land issues and access issues because you already have a public highway. And, you know, has anybody seen a cost-benefit analysis of putting an underground cable along that corridor? And also, is it possible, and these are questions we'll probably put to EirGrid, but in your own opinion, is it technically possible to underground the full routes? Because we're hearing that it's not, that there isn't examples around the world where 400 kV lines have been put underground over that length of infrastructure. And we just need to understand whether that's technically possible or not. I certainly need to do, as a person, I'm sure committee members and other members do as well. There are two questions I think need to be answered. The engagement and the consultation, specifics, and also specific cost-benefit analysis. And finally, Chairman, I don't want to hog the meeting, can I ask, has any analysis ever been done on the existing 400 kV line between Moneypoint and Dublin? I'm not saying you should do it, but it would seem to me it would be an obvious place to look, because I'm not accusing anybody of speculation or anything like that, but it would, like, rather than understanding what's ahead, surely we should look at what's existing and see, has there been an impact of that 400 kV line on the communities along that route from a health perspective, from a land value perspective, and from a tourism perspective. And I think they're the pertinent questions we need to be asking if we're going to have a proper, informed and calm debate about this issue, because it is a very important issue for people, and they're very, very concerned, as are many members here as well. So if you could just give us some more information in that regard, I'd certainly welcome it. Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, Nigel.
Sorry, I think I can answer the question that Deputy Coffey posed on the is it possible to underground the route? At this moment in time, there is a similar scheme in progress being carried out between France and Spain, where they are undergrounding, and that project is actually referred to in the International Expert Commission's report. Its situation was there was so much resistance each side of the border that in 2010, I think it was, that the actual European Commission decided that they would grant the money, or a good lot of the money, to actually underground it, because it was vital for Spain to have some more electricity coming in from France. That's going through the Pyrenees. And they are constructing an 8-kilometre tunnel, which was finished last April. The tunnel, I think, is 2 or 3 metres in diameter, and it had to be drilled through the Pyrenees because obviously they couldn't dig it. There's a converter station at each end, and the technology that they are using is HVDC, high voltage direct current. You can move electricity any distance using HVDC. There's no problem undergrounding. The north, south, east, west, they've done it with east, west, can be undergrounded using that technology. With regards to the cost issue of it, we would contend that the cost would be more or less the same as the overhead line when you take all other things into consideration. Now, I would say that they don't want to do it with HVDC because it doesn't mesh into the grid the same way. So in other words, I would have to comply with what they call an N-1. So if you have the existing north-south interconnector, and then you have the new one running parallel to it, if one goes down, say it's hit by lightning, immediately, because if it's a mesh system, the power automatically transfers onto the existing one, and so the lights don't go out, no fuse is blowing. But I would say that with the HVDC running parallel to that, that if the overhead one goes down, that there will be a serious difficulty in that interaction happening simultaneously. But then the expert international committee, they pointed out that it was capable of working in parallel without any difficulty. So there's always a conflict. There's a conflict there between what EirGrid are saying and what the International Commission are saying. Now, when we met the International Commission before they started the report, we asked them were they going to consider any future technologies that was coming down the track, and they said no. We've only been allowed to consider what's on the shelf today. But they said to us, if we would be doing this report in 2 years' time, we might be doing a different report. Now, the Expert Commission report is actually 2 years old this month, and it might be appropriate to go back to the International Commission and ask them to re-evaluate and is what new technology is now available that wasn't available 2 years ago. With regard to studies being done on the existing 400 kV lines coming across from Moneypoint, EirGrid have commissioned post-facto studies on those lines, I think maybe 18 months or 2 years ago. Those studies haven't been published yet, so maybe you could look to EirGrid for those studies. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Deputy Coffey. Just briefly, we're not here, or I'm certainly not here purporting to be an expert in this area. We're catching up as fast as we can and educating ourselves, but I think expertise should be sought in relation to it, and up-to-date expertise, independent and objective expertise. EirGrid are funding this project to the tune of over €3 billion, and they're promoting their own agenda in relation to it. And the other side of the coin should be sought. In relation to the full cost-benefit analysis of undergrounding along established infrastructure routes, when I specifically asked for a cost-benefit analysis of the routes being proposed, not undergrounding or not along the infrastructure routes, I was told that they weren't costed yet. The proposed routes between Great Island and Dunstown outside of Kilcullen, Kildare, I was specifically told that no cost estimates had been done along those routes, and I find that remarkable, that they hadn't costed the particular routes that they were suggesting as being viable routes. Not that he wasn't aware of the costings, and I specifically asked him, and he was definite that the costings had not been done. So if the costings hadn't been done on the overground routes that are being proposed, you certainly aren't going to get costings from them. What's that?
Do you believe that the costings weren't done?
I find it remarkable if they haven't been done.
Yeah.
So that's where we are in relation to gaining information from them in their public consultation phase, as they call it when you ask specific questions.
We don't have the public confidence. That's the transparency that I'm speaking about. Okay.
Deputy Kilreevy. Sorry, okay. Peter.
Sorry, can I just make a point that Deputy Rabbit said last week that the government shouldn't get involved in the planning process. But I mean, this particular project, thank God we're not in a position that you guys are, but this particular project is not really in the planning process, it's in the consultation process. So there is time to stop it, to go back and look at all of these things before any more money's wasted on it.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Kilreevy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. I represent Stuyvesant North Leitrim, which isn't as badly impacted as other areas by this. But I have no doubt that what you're going through at the minute, the area that I represent, is going to have exactly the same issue in relation to hydraulic fracturing. We'll have exactly the same fight as you have now, and we need to learn from your experience. There are a couple, 2 or 3 key things in all of this. The first one is, what does consultation mean? And what's the difference between consultation and dictation? It is not consultation if somebody says to me or to you or to communities that yes, there will be full public consultation, but the lines are going overground. That is not consultation. That's dictation. The second thing is, I think what we're dealing with here is a legacy of an absence of strategy in relation to national power. Because nobody has looked at this whole picture, the impact on tourism, impact on health, a cost of delays that will be inevitably will be there if the overhead ground goes ahead, the overhead lines go ahead, cost in agriculture, property values. People get worried when so-called experts come on and say there's no evidence that property values are impacted by overhead lines. Common sense. If I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to pay less for one where there's a pylon behind it than I would for one where there isn't. It's self-evident common sense. So people get worried when this sort of nonsense is put forward as rationale for proceeding with overhead lines. So we need that sort of a strategy. And it should be a 20, 30-year strategy, not a strategy to get the power in now. The third thing I will say is this. People are dismissive of health concerns in relation to overhead pylons. I know that there's a housing estate close to me, and the housing estate has 2 houses which were built, in my view, far too close to an existing pylon there. They have a small backyard. The children in one of the houses used to play in their backyard, and staff from the company said to the parents, look, really you shouldn't allow your kids to play in the backyard there. Mother said, but look, there's a big fence, they can't get near the pylon. It's not the issue of them getting near the pylon, it's the issue of what's coming from the overhead wires into the children. So that nobody say to me that there are no health impacts. Of course there are. 2 things that I find unusual. Somebody said, I think it was John McCusker who said, if I understood you correctly, John, that the driver of this is certainly not to keep the lights on, which is what the company say. You're the first person I've said that, because most people will recognise that we do need a secure energy supply in this country. So I will ask you to clarify that one. And the second one, I think it was Cian Maloney who said it shouldn't be left to concerned citizens to fight for these rights. I disagree. I think that what you've done is sterling work. And I think what you're doing is democracy in action. And if the legislative and the planning process and the political process isn't looking after your rights, then of course you should stand up and fight to ensure that those rights are protected. So I think not only have you, should it not be left to you, I think it's great that you have stood up to defend your rights. And I've no doubt that people in the area I represent will do the same when the discussion comes in relation to hydraulic fracturing. So well done all.
Yeah, briefly, briefly, Chairman. I just want to try and put this consultation to bed once and for all. About a month ago, the European Commission published a list of projects. They're called projects of common interest for energy projects that have got a cross-border or cross-state dimension. And of course, we had the North-South interconnector in that, which we have with us for 7 years. But lo and behold, and this is about consultation, in that there is another interconnector proposed in Ireland by EirGrid, now on a list of possible funded projects at European level. And that's a 275 interconnector, 275 kV interconnector on an overhead power line from Sligo to Turleenan. Turleenan in County Tyrone, which is the northern point of the one we're dealing with at the minute. That has never been in the public domain before. It has never been published as part of Grid 25. Yet EirGrid can, and possibly our department as well, can apply to Europe for funding for that project and then come and start to consult with people when they've got to go ahead. That is what EirGrid's consultation is all about. Local communities are having to find out these things for themselves. And can I say, and I say this sincerely to you, and for those of you who don't know, I'm a politician myself from a county council. People out there, because of this EirGrid project, actually see politics as failing the people. That's what local communities are saying to us, and I'm saying it's the exact same everywhere. And the reason for that is very simple. EirGrid, semi-state body, with huge financial resources behind them, can spin and say as they like. And the political system is seen to believe what they say without examining it in minute detail. Local communities are examining it. Local communities are coming up with alternatives, are coming up with where they fail, how the system fails them. But local communities are now depending on this committee to help them. They need help. They need help. They genuinely need help. EirGrid are not listening to us. We've had 6 years of it. They don't listen. They don't act. They don't take on board. And if politics is going to be seen to be what it is about people, the first port of call of local communities now, and maybe the last port of call, is this committee. And I say to you genuinely, please do something about what is going on out there. We've had it for 6 years. The rest of the country is going to have it for the next 6. That's not acceptable. It should not be allowed to happen. Very genuine, simple things, simple questions should get a very genuine, simple, truthful answer. And the final thing I'll say about consultation is this. To me, consultation is about engaging with people on whether it's a problem or a proposal or whatever. And it's about consulting, it's about taking all views on board. And somewhere in the middle, consultation normally ends up, if it's to move forward, with both sides giving a little and meeting somewhere in the middle. There's no meeting in the middle here. Somebody has already said it. Every one of these projects is said at the very start, it's an overhead power line. It can go within 25 metres of your house. We can do it, and we will do it. That's not consultation. That's where the system has failed. Please help us.
Okay, thank you for that, Owen. Could I just say that I suppose the reason that you have all been invited in here this morning is originally we had decided or talked about inviting EirGrid in first, and when we discussed it at committee level, we changed and felt that it was important that the concerns that you have on the ground level and that you're faced with and the answers you're not getting, to ask you in first to allow us as members and all the public representatives to actually put those questions to EirGrid when they're coming in, when they come in before us on the 4th of December. And obviously the transcript of this meeting today will go directly to the minister as well, and all of that. So I would hope that all of you, and thank you for coming in. I would hope that you would see that as a way of airing all of the frustrations and the concerns in a very on public record, and in a way, I suppose, of obviously there's a lot of emotion in this issue, and rightly so, but I think this kind of a forum can allow the actual issues to be addressed rather than, if you like, the personalities, if you like. So now I'll go on to Deputy Phelan.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and to welcome the community groups before us here today, Chairman, because it's hugely.
Start, Deputy Phelan. Could I again, as I said, I need to get everybody in. So if we, as much as possible, to questions,
okay.
And also to the presenters, if they could confine themselves as much as possible to the questions that have been asked, because in the sense of fairness and getting to everybody eventually.
Okay,
Sorry,
Chair, I try to be as brief as possible. But I suppose, as all of the other members in this room we have been meeting with community groups to do with this air grid project. I think what comes out, all of us, is the lack of consultation, which has actually led to a loss of confidence in air grid. The public have no confidence in air grid anymore. And it has been completely eroded, because even up to yesterday we've been getting messages from people saying, look, we've been asking EirGrid for this information and EirGrid have not responded. So that's not how you do public consultation. To that end, actually, Deputy Coffey made most of the points that I want to make, and it's to do and all around with the existence of the M9. And almost everywhere in the expert commission report, they say that the best cable route is most likely following existing infrastructure, such as large freeways or railways. On page 36, they say the same. It refers to the Spain-France interconnection, which is all underground and also following the freeway. On page 51, it says following major roads. So almost everywhere throughout that report, they're saying that they should follow major infrastructure. Now, again, I also want to put it to the community groups, and I want to get EirGrid to look at the feasibility of looking at the motorway. It is, to me, the shortest possible, straightest route. It's in state ownership. There is no need for compensation. Now, as I was driving up this morning, I was trying to do a sort of not a very scientific approach, but I was trying to take into mind, see how many houses were actually very close to the motorway, because of the 50 metre that they say, you know, the cables will be 50 metres away from houses. There didn't seem to be that many houses 50 metres. There seemed to be a number of houses more than 50 metres away from the motorway. So if we go up the motorway, we seem to be able to, you know, it's existing infrastructure. We seem to be able to take away a lot of the things that the community groups have an angst, much more than an angst over. So I think that this committee has a duty to go and ask EirGrid to certainly look at the motorway. And the Great Island, there's only about 5 or 8 miles from where the cable needs to be taken from Great Island to where the motorway infrastructure begins. So, I mean, I'm not an electrical engineer or an expert in any way, but it seems to me to stand out that this is the route that we should be taking. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Anyone want to comment or whatever?
Yeah, just no. Mr. Comeraghs left the chamber, but he asked me a couple of points. Keep the lights on. At every opportunity that EirGrid get on the national airways or in consultation sessions, the mantra, the PR mantra and spin that they've been taught and trained is repeated time and time again. And this slogan of keep the lights on just reappears itself all the time. Ireland has a very strong national grid, already has a very strong national grid. The issue here is certain memorandums of agreement have been signed and agreed between certain EU parties and EU states. I mean, it's not beyond the realms of understanding that France are decommissioning a number of nuclear stations, so are England. England are also decommissioning a number of fossil fuel stations. Those stations will be decommissioned in around 2020, 2025. And here we have the GridLink project getting ready for interconnectors to ship renewable energy, which we welcome, but to ship renewable energy across people's houses, across over to Europe. That is the sole purpose of this project, and EirGrid just need to come out and be honest with the people. It's not about keeping the lights on at all. Mr. Clareevy also mentioned that you would pay less for a house if it was near a pylon or a line. I mean, that's totally incorrect. You wouldn't buy the house. You don't need to be an estate agent. You don't need to have an expert commission and pay hundreds of thousands of euros to tell you that answer. Would anybody here buy a house that has a pylon or an overhead line within 25 metres of it? I don't see too many hands up. The fact of the matter is you just wouldn't, because you know in your heart and soul, mentally you know that it's just not right. On the matter of the consultation, this is the GridLink brochure that was produced for our area. There's not one mention of pylon or overhead line in the text of this brochure. We see lovely, beautiful pylons in flat, open fields, hay fields and cornfields. We don't see one house. We don't see one mountain. We don't see one area of scenic and of national importance. The consultation process is only issued by EirGrid on one fundamental fact: this is an overhead line project. It's been discussed here and mentioned. That's a prerequisite to them commencing consultation. The consultation is not based on undergrounding, overgrounding and all the other arguments. It's only based on overhead, and any submission you put in is based on the prerequisite that it's an overhead project. On the issue of cost-benefit analysis that Mr. Coffey raised, we haven't seen it, no one's seen it, it's not there. We've put in our submission a number of points, 18 points for cost-benefit analysis applies. I'm just going to talk about one of them. Ireland's in the middle of a very deep recession. It's a fledgling construction industry we have at the moment. This project is valued, they say, at $500,000. That's clearly stated. But as one of our colleagues mentioned earlier, how can they say $500,000 that they haven't costed? How can you put $500,000, or sorry, not $500,000, 500 million, apologies, $500 million. How can you state 500 million in a documentation when you turn around and say to the people, we haven't costed it? I got that answer as well. Oh no, none of these routes have been costed. I mean, I find that absolutely amazing that a government department is undertaking a project and at various stages along, various milestone stages along the project, they haven't costed it. Sorry, just going back to my point about the cost-benefit analysis, the fledgling construction industry. There's one thing in Ireland we're very good at. We're very good at construction. We're very good at building roads. We have lots of grounds work, contractors, machines, all lying idle, being shipped across the world because there's no work for them. If we were to consider an undergrounding option, this is one of the issues that would have to be fed back into the cost-benefit analysis. Local construction, local workers, people in the local communities where the undergrounding would take place would get work. There'd be something positive would come out of it for them. Trenching, excavation, general groundworks, suppliers of quarry stone, backfill products, sand and gravel, tarmac, cable laying crews, fencing contractors, and then local agricultural contractors who would come back on the land afterwards and make it good and reseeded. The full benefits of the exchequer of all of those little issues that I just discussed would need to be analysed in a cost-benefit analysis in terms of VAT, corporation tax, income tax, PRSI, universal social charges and all the other levies that are applied at the moment, plus the reduction in social services costs and the dependence on social services by construction workers at the moment. All of those simple issues, which is just point 8 in our submission, are not analysed by EirGrid or not analysed by any body as we're aware of at the moment. So we would urge the committee, this is your opportunity. We're only people of Ireland. I have 4 young children trying to do a day's work, here trying to represent my local community. You're our elected representative, so we urge you on this committee, you have the power of this committee to bring this project to a stop and reassess it and reevaluate it This is an 80-year play, an 80 to 100-year play on the people of Ireland. The cost of the...
Chairman, could I just ask Mr. McCusker to clarify how, as a committee, have we the power to make it stop?
Well, can you not report back to the Oireachtas?
No.
It's part of your terms. It's part of your terms of reference. The terms of reference that we were given. The terms of reference that we were given is that it's up to this committee comments on public spending, value for money, compliance with the EU law and directives, which we've clearly demonstrated that the project is not complying with. So therefore, under your terms of reference that we have been given, is that not your function?
We need to clarify that.
Yeah,
to be fair.
no, I don't think it's within the remit of this committee to actually stop the project. Obviously,
But bring it to the House.
no, obviously, what we will do is bring the discussion and debates that we have here and to the people, to the minister, and to the sorry.
Good, please. Can I come in and point of order? Could I make a point of order?
You can, yes.
Please, thank you. No, I've put down broad questions, priority questions to Minister Rabbit. So let's be honest here with ourselves now, with our guests. I'm not trying to be political, but he has told me, blatantly, Cloncola has, that the questions are out of order. He has no responsibility for Equid. So we're going to have to get real here and make our decision here, bring it to government and change the policy, because that is what the people are saying. Be fair to our guests. He won't debate it in the chamber.
I don't think, Deputy McGrath, that we can kind of state here some power that we don't have.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying we have a process to go through.
Yes, of course, and it's a long process, and this is happening this morning to feed into the processes there, and allow everybody on the committee and to, if you like, digest, as I said earlier, what has been said here, and reflect that in our deliberations later on, and in what we put to the minister.
Chairman, I think you're incorrect. This committee and our Parliament, the Dáil, like, we decide whether this happens or not. It is government policy at the moment to have them overground. And like, let's not make it any more complicated than it is. If the government decide it's not government policy anymore, and I'm sure Deputy McGrath and I will support him and Deputy Galreevy will support him, then your problem is solved and we can come back to consultation that never took place. It's not that complicated. It might suit some people.
Sorry. Well, then you might need to change the legislation, because if you check the legislation, you'll see that EirGrid are the TSO, that's the Transmission Systems Operator. They are responsible basically to nobody. They are controlled by the CER, the Commission of Energy Regulation, and we're not actually even sure if they're actually responsible or have to answer to the Minister for how they design or lay their power lines. Now, with an answer to the question of going up the motorways with the power lines, there are no motorways in County Monaghan. And to answer the 50 metres, which seems to somehow or other has become an accepted distance that is acceptable to keep the pylons and power lines away from dwellings. Well, we don't know where this 50 metres comes from, because certainly in Northern Ireland it's 75 metres for the exact same line. Now, with regard to the Bewley-Denny line in Scotland, 100 metres distance, and I'm quoting from the submission by the Northern Ireland Electricity to the public inquiry, 100 metre distance has been established as a general guide in order to address concerns relating to visual amenity. The 100 metres distance has been proposed as at this distance for a property located on level ground with a garden extending to 15 metres from the house, a 10-metre tall tree at the end of the garden will screen views of 55-metre tall towers located at 100 metres from the property. Whilst these towers applicable to the proposed overhead line, that's the Northern Ireland section, are up to 42 metres in height and are not as tall as those discussed in the Bewley-Denny line, the principles of this approach are still relevant, and when these principles are applied to the smaller tower heights of up to 42 metres, the distance at which screening would not be effective would reduce to 75 metres. Now, no matter how stupid and silly that reason is to pick those distances, at least it's some sort of a reason, but EirGrid have given no reason whatsoever why they have picked 50 metres.
Okay, Deputy Phelan, do you want to just come in briefly?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that because it's not that I'm saying 50 metres is the correct distance or anything like that. I was just using it as this is what EirGrid are saying, that the minimum safe distance is 50 metres. But also another thing I wanted to point out, and if we are going to monitor the Clare to Dublin 400 kV line, I actually agreed with Deputy Mulhern, who we have written to the Minister for the Environment to ask him, could the Radiological Institute of Ireland be called in to monitor the EMF fields around that line, because I think that because the public have lost confidence in EirGrid themselves, and if EirGrid are monitoring that, I don't think it'll really add up. So I think the Radiological Institute, I think Deputy Coffey put forward that suggestion as well, and I think this committee should actively take up that suggestion. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, now sorry, first I just come to you there. Yeah, okay. Peter.
I'd like to make the point about the process of this committee. We've been invited here today and we're all very grateful for it, but it's very clear that we're at a very different stage of the process than Monaghan are. And they have very different issues ahead of them to do with the planning process. So I feel it's only fair to point out that we really should have separate sittings or separate joint committees so that we can really pass on our feelings, because as somebody mentioned, the process of democracy is important. We're very grateful for that, for the opportunity to partake in it. But one of the cost factors and one of the constraints that EirGrid are now facing is a number of people up and down the line who are saying no to this. So then there needs to be there needs to be an opportunity for both parties to look at their issues separately.
Sorry, just can I mean, I agree that the different groups here are at a different stage, but what we felt is that it was important at this stage of the process. Of course, this is a long process. There will be other meetings, there will be other hearings and all of that. But we felt in advance of meeting EirGrid that we needed to hear, you know, I think it's important to hear the stages that the different groups are at and the different areas of the country are at. So, but certainly if you know, this will not be concluded at this hearing or anything like that, and there will be many future hearings. We've already discussed here before about an umbrella group for all of the groups that is emerging, and I'm sure that their views will be heard here at some stage as well. So certainly, you know, this is a facility, and the committee is a facility that wouldn't be possible in Dáil chambers or anything else. So what we want to do is that put that at the behest of groups like yourselves to give you a voice. Obviously, you know, we have to go into discussion yet in our considerations of this, and we have to work within the terms of reference, and that's a debate that we have to go through ourselves. But I would feel that this is democracy. This is democracy in action. That there is a long process, and that has to be gone through, and there will be other hearings.
Just an hour.
Sorry, could I?
Point of information. Just I hear referring back to an issue that was discussed a few minutes ago. EirGrid have said if government policy changes on this, that they will underground. So it's very important that we take that under that aspect.
Yeah, but I mean, that's, yes, all of those issues have to be discussed here at committee following these hearings and feedback the information and the opinions of the committee as well. So now I intend to, because otherwise we're not just going to get to the end of this process even today. Sorry, yes, you get in first, yes. Briefly,
please. Deputy Phelan said that EirGrid acknowledge a minimum safe distance of 50 metres from dwellings. They don't. To do so would be to acknowledge that there is an unsafe distance from houses, and they don't do that. They say that they will endeavour to keep them 50 metres from houses.
Alina?
I just kind of wanted to take a step back here and just look at the whole Grid 25 policy. the Grid 25 policy was developed by EirGrid, who are a private company, albeit wholly owned by the department, by the Minister Rabbit. And I just question how it can be that a private company can develop government policy in this way. My second point is that the government policy has to reflect the people of Ireland, and Ireland has some quite unique attributes compared to other countries. In particular, in terms of how we inhabit our rural landscape. I mean, everyone knows that Ireland has a dispersed settlement pattern. The Irish people live in our landscape to a much greater extent than in other countries. And I feel that fundamentally in the Grid 25 process, that just hasn't been addressed. And under EU law, people who inhabit a landscape have rights to be involved in decisions that are made by that landscape. And that should have happened right at the inception of this process, and it didn't happen. So there's a really serious question for me about Ireland's commitment to these EU conventions to do with landscape, and even the Aarhus Convention. As a government, how committed are we to implementing those? And when you look at the timeline for the European Landscape Convention, that 11 and a half years after we ratified that there's no national landscape policy. This goes beyond. It goes beyond EirGrid. EirGrid have just been given a job to do, but it's about the government fulfilling their obligations under EU policy for the good of the people of Ireland. So I think the whole thing just needs to be reviewed from that standpoint. Irish government policy needs to reflect the needs of the people of Ireland.
Okay, so
just want to also clarify the 50 metre. Let's get that myth totally out of your mind. EirGrid have never said that the minimum distance is 50 metres. What they'll tell you is they aspire to be 50 metres. Now, I questioned John Lowry from EirGrid on this in the Granville Hotel in County Waterford. I asked him what was the absolute minimum distance that a pylon or a line could go to a house. He did not give me an answer. I understand it to be 12 metres, and that's because of the electrical flashover between a cable and an earthing structure like a house. But EirGrid have never said what the minimum distance is. Not even the fall distance of the pylon. If you take the pylon at 45 metres, and we saw heavy storms in England there a couple of weeks ago where pylons were blown over and heavy lines were blown over. So one would imagine that at least the fall distance of any line or pylon should be taken into consideration. But let's be clear about it. EirGrid have never stated, and maybe they will next week or when you meet them on the 4th, what the minimum, absolute minimum distance is. And I'd love to hear what that absolute minimum distance is.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Question of minimum height, and it's just from my own experience.
Yeah, I just want. I need to. If you briefly, if you want to just come
briefly, minimum distance of any pole pylon is the height of the structure plus 1 metre. So if it's 55 metres, it's 55. Well, I can't be sure about the pylon. The minimum is the height of the pole, height of the column, and it also depends on the transmission voltage going through the lines. That's it. That's policy.
By who? Whose policy?
ESB.
ESB policy.
ESB policy.
Yeah.
Not EirGrid.
Okay. Great. Yeah, no, yes.
Thank you, Chairman. And I too want to welcome all our businesses today. And I understand totally that they're all lay people, all trying to raise their families and live in their communities. And depending on, I suppose, government and successive governments, I might add, to defend and defend their right to live and be able to live in a situation that's not injurious to their health. And we've seen and we've heard excellent presentations, and especially that EirGrid document where it doesn't mention, what it should mention. It talks about everything but the elephant in the room. And when it was on this last committee, and we had groups in before, and it's a pity, suppose, that the national group hadn't set up yet, because you referred to me, wrote back to the city, weren't ready, or they weren't ready, the national organisation. So we are where with that. But as I said, there's a memorandum of understanding, I believe, signed by Minister Rabbit with our British counterparts to supply this current that these lines are going to serve. We were also supposed to go in the last committee. We never went. a group of members to visit underground sites in Europe. It never happened. I believe it should happen because we're operating in the dark. We were told. I certainly raised the issue at the last committee several times with Minister Ryan and with the people who were in about putting it with the motorways, because some of them were only being developed and designed at that time, and up the middle of the motorways on the side of it or whatever, and we were told that the cable would overheat. We'd be told nothing, only, I hate using the word lies, but they're damned lies. We've been told all the time. So we see that people are totally dissatisfied with the sham of a token consultation. And it's timely now that we acted here. And I do know the programme for government, and I refer you all to it, our own members, air grid bill is listed in a publication or an enactment of an air grid bill. So we have an opportunity, and I questioned the Taoiseach on this twice last week when it's going to be introduced. So he said it's that very preliminary drafting stage. So time for all of us to get our teeth into that and make sure that the air grid legislation reins them in, because current legislation obviously isn't right. And my colleagues in Solani just said to me a while ago, whenever they set up, who set them up? Probably the last government. I have no problem with that, but I mean, we need to rein them in, because we see the legislation is inadequate to have respect for the people who elect all of us here and who are supposed to be fundamental under the Constitution. So we haven't had any real, proper consultation. We haven't either. And I've certainly been out of the last committee, out in the Air Grid's headquarters control room, and I got no impression. And it's a very fascinating visit to see the whole situation and where it's located over the city. I certainly never got an indication that the lights were turned and they were going to go off at any time. That's not true. And they're putting that in all their press releases that it's keep the lights on. It's not true. There is Minister Rabbit told me privately last week that there is an issue with the North, South and Northern Ireland are in trouble with it, but let them get it from the people who control it here. I mean, why should we feed the monster? Why should we be allowed to feed the monster, whether it's Angela Merkel or whether it's our colleagues across the water? They've took enough from us over the years, so I think it's time that we accept it ourselves and we defend our people. I want to just say that the France-Spain project, I think somebody should go visit that. It's what I heard of it. I thank one of our guests today for highlighting that project. And I mean, we're told you can't do it. It overheats and it's not compatible. We're told everything. I'm not a qualified electronics either. So I'm just making the point that the K2 study then, and I'm not being sound selfish here, because that's the one that's affecting South Tip and Waterford, Carlow, Kilkenny and Wexford. And then I understand it goes on from Wexford up under by sea. So we've asked Air Grid, and I've asked them at some of their sham consultations. They refused to come to any meetings. We had as well. Why did it go from the sea off the Cork coast, around the Waterford coast, and up to the part of Wexford, up to Wexford? Also outside our study group. Did you ever hear anything like it, outside the study area? I mean, why? We have that option down there. It's no good to the Midland people, or it's no good to the North-South, and the Monaghan people who are supported and have supported, and you know, I have family, I mean, all my wife's from Monaghan, and I understand how they've been fighting for years, and I salute the massive work they have done. And it is, they're at different stages, but we have to all stand together on this, and people power must matter. We have the Air Grid bill coming up, so maybe that could be expedited, and could ensure that the law is the law, and this is semi-state, but there's no doubt it'll be sold off, it'll be privatised, and it'll be paid for through our ESB meters in our houses. The profits will be in someone else's pockets, and the WHO World Health Organization must, the precautionary principle must be also, as regards health, the thing is not insurers, we must ensure that they indemnify the people to that.
Have you any questions?
Well, the questions I have is that really to thank the people for coming, ask them have they a view about especially the K2 project going around the sea from where it starts in Cork to Wexford. Thank you for coming again.
Anyone want to comment?
Yeah, we've asked about that as well as the undergrounding, and received the same answer that it's not viable. As you said, they can't regulate the temperatures. They can't. It's slower for maintenance. If something happens, you get the impression from them that if something happens along the line, they won't be able to pinpoint where it is. But I mean, there's sensors that you can input along the line now and pinpoint very accurately where any problems are. They're doing it submarine, going across the channels and the Irish Sea. There's no reason at all, particularly in the GridLink project that you speak about, why they can't go from Cork to Great Island in Wexford along the coast, or by sea rather, and they're travelling to Dunstown then outside Cuchulainn, which is probably about 20 kilometres inland at some point. What you'll say, you mentioned health as well, in relation to, there's reports on both sides, and what you'll get from EirGrid when you quote reports about the health aspect and the concerns about health, is that you'll get wording such as there's no conclusive evidence that there are health effects, or there's no definitive data, and words to that effect. Well, I'd reiterate what you suggested in relation to the precautionary principle, and to err on the side of caution in relation to the health of the citizens of this country.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Nigel.
Right. Just want to pick up on the point about health. We accept that the jury is out with regards to health. There is no causative effect has been established that EMFs actually cause cancer. And research is still ongoing on the basis of epidemiological evidence that suggests that there is a link between childhood leukemia and EMFs at a very, very low level of between 0.3 and 0.4 microtesla. EirGrid have published this brochure called EMF and You. And while health is a very, very serious issue, we would at least expect that the information in this brochure is correct and accurate. If we go to page 18 of the brochure, it says, what is the view of the Irish government? And then it goes on to quote from a study review that was done in March 2007, commissioned by the then DCMNR. And then it goes on to quote from a study that emanated from the Office of the Chief Scientific Advisor, of which that office is now closed, and the scientific advisor has retired. Now, what is the view of the Irish government? While these two bodies might be very fine people, they're not the Irish government. And the view of the Irish government is quite simply, the government decided that a single state agency be established to deal with both ionising radiation and non-ionising radiation. This will be achieved by extending the statutory powers of the Radiological Protection Institute of Ireland to include responsibility for matters relating to non-ionising radiation. The government has also agreed to establish a national research programme to undertake further scientific research in Ireland on the health effects of exposure to EMF. This research programme will build expertise in Ireland and contribute to global knowledge. Now, to my knowledge, those two promises have yet to be fulfilled. Now, I believe that it isn't trained to transfer responsibility to the RPII from the Department of the Environment, but that hasn't happened yet. It goes on then to state that in relation to EMF, that is electromagnetic fields, the report states no adverse health effects has been established below the limits suggested by international guidelines. But in actual fact, in that report, it's quite clear that that statement of no adverse health effects have been established below the limits suggested by international guidelines only refers to electric fields and does not refer to magnetic fields. What the report says about magnetic fields, it says there is limited scientific evidence of an association between magnetic fields and childhood leukemia. This does not mean that magnetic fields cause cancer, but the possibility cannot be excluded. And then it claims then, the quote then from this document from the Office of the Chief Scientific Advisor says it is simply not possible for the level of energies associated with power lines to cause cancer. The Chief, I can assure the committee that the Chief Scientific Advisor will not stand over that statement. That's the Chief Scientific Advisor at the time.
Okay, John?
Obviously, our colleagues here have mentioned the very excellent reports. We mentioned in our submission the European Commission have themselves set up a scientific committee on emerging and newly identified health risks. They have done 2 reports for the last number of years where they have stated that the documentation